And I got an email back 3 o'clock in the morning, like literally 5 hours later, saying, Mr. Van Damme loves Australia. He would love to come back. And he went from talking in the third person to, here's my phone number, call me. And I was like, then I couldn't go back to sleep.
Hey guys, got a really fun story for you. My guest, Dan Delts from Australia, he's the guy that runs these star tours. So if you ever met anybody famous in Australia like Van Damme or Steven Skull, etc., it's probably because of Dan Delts. He takes all these famous celebrities out there and does these star tours. But this is an interesting, fun story on how he even got started in this, and it involves a story with Jean-Claude Van Damme. Anyway, if you like this kind of content, make sure to help support the channel, hit the like button, subscribe, share the video. And for more Dan Delts, check out his Instagram, which I'll link in the description below. You can kind of see some of the upcoming celebrities that he's got planned to bring out there. How did you basically get into this whole star touring thing? Because you took people like Van Damme out to Australia, Steven Skull out to Australia, Dolph Lundgren, like all these, big name action martial art movie star guys. A lot of the people that, watch the channel love those guys. And basically, you're like Steven Seagal and Van Damme's manager in Australia, aren't you?
Yeah, well, Van Damme I managed for 3 years on a contract, and we brought him out and we did a commercial together. Seagal, I mean, a lot of these guys now don't have full-time agents or theatrical agents, or they might have agents for different regions. So because obviously they've got the experience with me and the relationship with me, that if they want to come to Australia, they'll hit me up. So the way that I got into the Star Tour stuff is really quite bizarre, because I kind of fell into it. I had no intention of doing it, but what happened was I had done some stuff with a guy named Tony Doherty, who's the Arnold Classic bodybuilding, which they have it in Columbus, Ohio, and they have it in the UK, and they have it in a few countries. He was converting his bodybuilding expo called FitX into the Arnold Classic. And Arnold was coming out, and he basically said to me, "Hey man, have you got any people that would pay money to do a meet and greet with Arnold?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." I'd run movie screenings all the time. I was doing these old school films, which was a story in itself. Is that the movie Escape Plan was due to come to cinema here. It didn't do well in the US, so they pulled the release of Escape Plan, and E1 decided it was going to go direct to video. And I remember ringing my cinema, and they were like, "Look, the only way you're going to see this film on the big screen is if you hire a cinema out." And my wife was like, "Well, you can do it." And I had no contacts. I had no money back then. And I was like, okay. So I found out how much a cinema cost. It was like $2,000, which was a lot of money. My wife's like, "Put it on the credit card." And I started messaging people and hitting people up on Facebook and really hustling and grinding. And I ended up filling this cinema twice over. And I did these best Schwarzenegger impersonations and had prizes, and best Stallone and best dressed. And this little 8-year-old kid came dressed up as Commando, who's now, the kid's now 18. I'll never forget them leaving Escape Plan. And Charles Gretsch said to me, "Man, I wish my son could watch all those films that we grew up watching on VHS on the big screen." And this light bulb moment went off in my head, and I was like, well, I'm not hiring a cinema out for $2,000 every week. But I found this small niche cinema in Melbourne called the Backlot, which is what our version. I don't know if you have like a gold class cinema there, but it's like basically like a premium cinema. It's only 30 seats. They're full recliners. It's a licensed bar. So I found this like private little cinema that would hire me the venue for like $500, and it held like 80 seats. So I started doing these screenings of Bloodsport and Kickboxer and all the Seagal ones and all the Van Damme ones. So over a year, I ended up getting quite a following and getting quite a database. So when Tony was bringing out turning the FitX into the Arnold Classic, he's like, "Have you got any people who would pay money to meet Schwarzenegger?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." And so I've helped him sell all these spots to Schwarzenegger, meet and greet. And then I remember straight after it, he's like, "Dan, it was a huge success. We're doing it again next year." So I was hitting up a few of my mates, and they're like, "Dan, we've met Schwarzenegger. We've just done it. We want to meet Van Damme." Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow. I was like, Jean-Claude, and I don't know why, but I hadn't thought about him for a while. I was like, I had his photos, posters, pictures, magazine cutouts all over my wall growing up. And I was telling a mate, and I was like, "Look, I just did this thing with Schwarzenegger. It was really successful, and now I want to bring out Van Damme." And he was like, "Hey, I've used to run like a movie website, and I think I've got his email address somewhere." And 5 minutes later, Mike gives me this email. He goes, "Look, I don't know if it's valid. I don't know if he still looks at it, but he's like, here's the email address. Good luck." So I emailed Jean-Claude. I was like, hey, I'm looking to bring Mr. Van Damme to Australia. I know he filmed Street Fighter here in 94. I actually met him a year or two later at Planet Hollywood at his birthday party. Would love to bring him out to Australia. And I got an email back 3 o'clock in the morning, like literally 5 hours later, saying, Mr. Van Damme loves Australia. He would love to come back. And he went from talking in the third person to here's my phone number, call me. And I was like, then I couldn't go back to sleep. I was like,
yeah, wow.
I said, I've just spoken to Van Damme and he's just given me his mobile number. So I remember at that stage, I only had one child. I kicked my wife and daughter out of the house. Mike, who gave me the email, I said, man, Van Damme emailed me back. You've got to come over. We're going to ring him. Might be the only time we speak to him. So he comes over, we record the call. We've rung him in Hong Kong. And he's like, Dan, I'd love to come out. And at that stage, I was not doing any touring and events. I had no idea what kind of money he wanted or what he was willing to do. And I was like, look, I know there's a lot of people that talk in the showbiz industry. Mm-hmm. I want to prove to you that I'm the real deal. And I want to prove to you that I'm legitimate and I'm serious about bringing you out. I want to come and meet you and I'll put a proposal forward. And he's like, I'm in Hong Kong, but there's no need for you to come out. And I'm like, well, I'm in Australia. It's only a few hours on a plane. So I took a few days off my paid job, took some annual leave, maybe even just took a couple of sick days, put these tickets on the credit card, and I flew to Hong Kong to meet him. And because I'd managed a couple of local R&B and hip hop artists in the music business, I took a management contract because I was thinking, why hasn't he ever done commercials here? Why hasn't he never done endorsement deals? So Mike and I, the guy that gave me the email, I took Mike with me. And it was so funny, man. We were in Hong Kong. We went to where Van Damme did the splits over the city. We were like tourists for 24 hours. Sure. We were doing lines from, we're giving lines from Double Impact and Bloodsport back to each other. And then we go to Van Damme's apartment in Hong Kong and he opens the door and Van Damme's there. And I'd met him 20 years before, but this is literally 20 years later. And he invites us into his apartment and, we talk and get to know each other. And he's like, so what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to bring you to Australia and do a fan meet and celebrate your career. And he's like, I love it. Let's do it. And I'll never forget, Mike and Jean-Claude were talking at the dinner table and I just wander over to his coffee table and his couch and I pick up John Woo Laserdiscs signed by John Woo to Jean-Claude. And that made me realize everyone's got a fan. So I was a fan of Van Damme and I couldn't believe I was with Van Damme in his house. Mm-hmm. And here's Van Damme who brought John Woo to America. And he was a fan of John Woo because he had all of the Better Tomorrow, Hard Boiled, The Killer, laser discs signed to Jean-Claude, lots of love, John Woo. And it just blew my mind, man. It was just, and for me to have seen that reality series Behind Closed Doors with Jean-Claude, which I think had only come out maybe a year or two before. So it was our first introduction to, his daughter Bianca and his son and Gladys. And then here I am in his house with their photos on the mantelpiece. It was so surreal.
Yeah, that is surreal.
And then I'll never forget him offering me, he's like, you come to Van Damme's house and, go into the fridge. You probably think I have lobster and caviar, but no, I have soy cheese and muffins. And, so he's making me muffins with soy cheese on it. And then I remember taking it saying, what's he supposed to do? Make my dick bigger? And he thought I was hilarious.
That's good.
And so we got on really well. And I said, look, I don't want to be too forward. I was like, why don't you ever do commercials and endorsement deals in Australia? Why has it been so long since you've been out? And he goes to me, because I don't have a manager there. And I was like, well, funnily enough, I've bought a management contract. And he read it over and he's like, yeah, this looks fine. And he sent it to his manager in LA. And 2 weeks later, I had a management contract. And then I went back to Australia and I just told everybody I knew that I was Van Damme's manager for Australia and people that owned restaurants, bars, cafes. Because at that stage, I still hadn't brought anybody out. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea what money he wanted. So I was just telling everyone that I managed him and, publicists that were in Australia and, a publicist who is a celebrity agent, Max Marks. And I told Max, I'm manager for Van Damme. I want to bring him out. And I just told everyone. So everyone knew. And then funnily enough, this Comic-Con reached out to me and we said, we heard you manage Van Damme. We'd like to bring him to Australia for a Comic-Con. And I got so excited because I thought it's happening. These guys have got money. They've made me an offer. Wow. And Jean-Claude couldn't do it because he was doing the Kickboxer remake. But the salesperson in me did not want to let that opportunity go. So I said to the Comic-Con, look, Jean-Claude's doing this movie. He's excited to come out maybe next year. But I'm like, who else would you want? And they said to me, who else can you get? And I started just rattling off names. And I said, Dolph Lundgren. I said, Dolph would be perfect because he's done Punisher, Universal Soldier, He-Man. Like, he's right up Comic-Con alley. Like, he's done all of that stuff. He's done sci-fi. He's done comic book characters. And again, this is before Aquaman, before Creed. And they're like, okay, we will take Dolph and we'll give you the same money that we've offered Jean-Claude to Dolph. And I had no connection to Dolph. I had no way of getting hold of him. I didn't have his contact number. I didn't have his email. I didn't have anything. So I literally started Googling Dolph Lundgren manager, Dolph Lundgren booking agent, Dolph Lundgren appearances. And I eventually found his manager's email, and Dolph had never done an appearance. He'd never done a Comic-Con. And I convinced his manager to forward the offer.
Sergeant Scott, can I have a word with you?
I'm all ears.
And he said, look, he's like, Dolph wants to do this. He's like, I don't know why, but he wants to do it. He loves Australia. He wants to come back. And, to ensure that we can make it as financially viable as possible, I said to Dolph, well, what else are you willing to do? And he's like, well, what can we do? And I was like, well, we can do martial arts seminars. We can do private dinners. We can run movie screenings and have you talk before the movie screening. And so we did all of those things. So that was how the format started, because I wanted to make sure it was financially viable for Dolph, is why I started booking people to do martial arts seminars, and this idea of doing private dinners where people would pay a premium, but you got to sit in a 5-star restaurant, sit at the table, ask a question, get a photo at the end, get an autograph at the end, and say you had dinner with Dolph Lundgren. And Dolph had a great time. And then from there, he went back and told people in LA, hey, if you want to go to Australia, Dan Delts is the guy to deal with. And I went out to LA on a few trips, and I ran into Dolph in Beverly Hills for lunch. He was coming out of the bathroom in Beverly Hills. I was going in. He was like, what are you doing here? And he's like, come and sit down with me. And so I've got a good friendship with Dolph. And then from there, people were coming to my movie events and my movie screenings, and now I've given them an experience to meet Dolph, and it was quite a small scale, the stuff that I did. And then the following year, an actual touring company said, we want to bring out Van Damme. We heard you're his Australian agent. And so I brokered that deal. We ended up brokering the commercial at the same time for Ultratune. And I ended up being offered a job at fast track events at that touring company. And 6 months later, I was running that touring company. Wow. And so then from there, because I had investment and investors, I was like, okay, we've done Van Damme now. Who can we do next? So then we did a couple of guys from reality show called $1 Million Listing Los Angeles, and they're reality stars and real estate agents in Beverly Hills. So that was perfect for me, because now I had guys who sold houses to the celebrities, and they're like, yeah, we know Kobe Bryant, and we just sold this guy a house, and we just sold Dolph a house. We're selling a house for this guy, and we're showing a house to that guy. And so I became really good friends with Josh and Matt Altman from $1 Million Listing LA.
Yeah, that ups the networking game quite a bit, man.
Yeah, and it just blew up. And so from there, and then from there it became easier, because now I had a track record. Now I could email an agent and say, I've brought out Dolph Lundgren and Jean-Claude Van Damme. This is my format. We do private dinners. We do a Q&A talking about their career, celebrating their career. Includes a photo line and an autograph line. So then I brought out Scott Adkins, and then after Scott, I did Jai White. And then after Jai White, I did John Cena, John Travolta, George St. Pierre, Anderson Silva, Steven Seagal.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And
you had Chuck Norris too, didn't you?
Yeah, Chuck was coming out for a Comic-Con, so I just hosted Chuck. But now I'm really good friends with Chuck and his wife, and I'm looking at bringing them back next year.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm good friends with Gina, his wife, and Chuck. I took them out on a boat and took them out for a nice meal in Sydney, and it's all about relationships.
Oh,
and
sure.
And the thing is, man, is like, you know now, because of all the stuff that you've done, is that you've interviewed so many people, and everybody knows each other. It's such a small. It's actually a small planet,
world, man. Yeah,
it's a really small planet, and I'll never forget walking down into Cafe Roma in Beverly Hills, because that's where Stallone always eats, and I met Stallone there a couple of times. Walking down the streets in Beverly Hills, and some guy yells out, "Hey, Dan Delts!" And I was like, and my mate goes, did someone just call out your name? And I was like, it sounded like it. And it was a guy who was in the scene, but was friends with, a lot of those guys. I think we're friends on social media. And so he sees my stuff all the time, and he recognized me and saw me in the streets. And yeah, we just said hi to each other. And yeah, I thought, okay, I'm onto something here, because if people in Beverly Hills are yelling out my name where people in my own hometown don't call out my name, I'm getting
you're getting out there, man. You know what's funny, by the way, Dan? Like, this is crazy for like the YouTube channel, because I went to Italy with my wife like a month or two ago on vacation, and there were literally 2 people that recognized me.
That's awesome.
One of the guys was a security guide at the Sistine Chapel, and he told me Sloan was there the previous day. I was like, oh man, I missed him by one day. That sucks. And then later, I was just walking down the street by my wife, and some guy said, "Hey, Viking Samurai." It's like,
awesome.
It's surreal, man, because I'm just doing this in my home office, and I mean, the channel's growing, but I would never think people from like Italy would recognize me. It was like kind of crazy.
It's a small world, man. It's a really small world. It's an even smaller industry. Everybody knows everybody. Everyone's worked with one another or has taken meetings with one another. And even for me, like, when pre-COVID, when I was in Beverly Hills, and here's me pulling on a bathroom door trying to get in, and Dolph walks out.
Yeah, that's funny.
And he's like, Dan, what are you doing here? And then so, we sit down and have lunch together in Beverly Hills, and whenever it's his birthday, I send him a message, and I'm just a people person that's, look, obviously for me, there's always an opportunity, whether it's to bring them out on a tour or to do some type of endorsement deal with them. I'd never to propose on their manager or booking agent, but a lot of them don't have formal or exclusive agents. So if I've got an opportunity for Seagal, or I've got an opportunity for Van Damme, I can send it to them. And, and if they want to come to Australia or they want to go to New Zealand, they're like, hey, Dan, we want to come, or we're coming to do something. Can you book us something on the side, or book us extra appearances? Just had Sam Jones, Flash Gordon, and he was like, Dan, there's this guy who used to play Australian rules football named Mark Jacko Jackson. And Jacko lived down the road from where I grew up, but I never saw him. But it was like, that famous Australian footballer lived on this street. We all knew it, but we never saw him. And he was in a TV series called The Highwayman with Sam Jones. I don't know if you remember that from 89, 90. It was a really cool series, and it's got a cult following. Only had 1 season. And I remember Sam saying to me, he's like, Dan, I'd love to catch up with Mark Jacko Jackson. I haven't seen him since 89. I haven't spoken to him. And I searched, he didn't have any social media. So I just Googled his name and found out that he was married. I searched his wife's name. His wife had an Instagram and she was like a physiotherapist or a masseuse or something. And so I sent her a text or an email via Instagram saying, hey, I know this might sound weird. I'm trying to get hold of Mark Jacko Jackson. I believe you're married to him. I have Sam Jones, who was in The Highwayman with him, out on tour. He would like to catch up. Here's my number if you happen to get this, and if you're married to Jacko. Anyway, 24 hours later, I have this call from this number I don't recognize. And it's, hey, Dan, it's Mark Jacko Jackson here. And I was like, hey, Jacko. And I just put him on to Sam and these guys. And he was thrilled. He's like, oh, Dan, that was so good. I've been wanting to speak to him for 30 years. And they were going to reboot The Highwayman before Glenn Larson died. And he was the producer that produced the A-Team. And, that Stephen J. Cannell and Glenn Larson, they were the 2 biggest TV producers of the 80s and 90s. Magnum and all of those A-Team, all of those series that we grew up loving on TV, there was pretty much those 2 TV producers and no one else at that stage in that sphere. And and I connected them and reconnected them. And who knows, maybe we'll, do a tour now with Mark Jacko Jackson and Sam Jones, because Highwayman has a huge following and they haven't seen each other for 30 years. And now they've reconnected. That's cool. And they would do something together. So it's all about just reaching out and being a bit of a detective and not giving up. And, I've had agents tell me that their talent's not going to be interested in what I have to offer, or their talent's going to want too much money or whatever it is. And I'm like, look, can you just put the offer forward and just see what they say? And 9 times out of 10, I get the deal done. I get them out here.
Wow. Yeah, it's worked out quite well. That's awesome, man. Share some fun details or story, by the way, because you obviously hung out with Seagal for quite a bit, Van Damme for quite a bit. Like, what's some interesting stuff the audience you could share with the audience about just these guys in their real life, right? We've all seen them in the movies,
Yeah.
but like in their
Yeah.
real life.